Greetings wherever you are situated in this universe. My name is Dr. Kaia Niambi Shivers, and I am speaking with Sebastian Prats. And today we're talking about we're circling back to this conversation about the redistricting wars. This is a part two. The first one we talked about the Louisiana versus Calais case. Now we're going to talk about two important cases that Sebastian pointed out. One is in Virginia, the other one is in Florida, and it's talking about these really how there is a manipulation of the vote through how changing these voting districts. So the first one we're going to talk about is that happened in Virginia, and this was recently in April, and this was actually something that the voters of Virginia had to make a decision on, and it was: do you redistrict the state before the 2030 system? Sorry, census. And narrowly, the answer was there was an approval. And this is in the midst of all of these redistricting efforts and attempts that are going on in states. And what we were seeing, especially when, you have Donald Trump coming into office, a lot of the voting experts are saying this is an effort in order to decrease votes in the voting power of communities of color, and poor communities or underrepresented communities, but particularly Black communities who have historically voted, especially since around the 1960s, right, for Democrats, right, and also to also diversify, the congressional representatives. So thank you so much for stopping by, Sebastian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a little hot outside, but that's kind of every day here in Puerto Rico.
Let me tell you, this brutal winter that we had here in the Northeast, I would love to be baked right now, but I do understand. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule. So tell me about this Virginia vote and break down some of the nuts and bolts of it before we get into your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, this was something that had been floated around for a long time, and it was something that actually on the gubernatorial campaign had been brought up to Abigail Spanberger saying, hey, would this be something you would do as governor? She kind of tiptoed around it as a campaign move, also because it does come down to the legislature. Ultimately, she did come out in support of it, and it passed. Now, I think some people were disappointed that it wasn't as large of a margin of victory as they wanted. It absolutely underperformed Abigail Spanberg in her historic and enormous victory in November of 2025. But I think that some context is needed there because historically Virginia has been very much a moderate state. And even though for many years now it has calcified for the Democratic Party, it is still capable of electing Republicans statewide. It's as recent as 2021, it elected Glenn Youngkin and his entire administration to the governor's mansion. So it's certainly a state that is open to these things, which is why Republicans did put up a fierce fight against the redistricting referendum, as opposed to California, where they gave up on funding it altogether more than a month before the election. And in the end, the margin we saw was almost entirely analogous to the results of the 2024 presidential election, which I know for a lot of people, again, might sound disappointing, but some of the key parts of that result were that minority communities relative to 2024 did shift to the left, particularly Black and Latino voters, as opposed to white voters who, relative to the 2024 presidential election, were more towards the right. Now, this is obviously not a referendum that speaks to the whole nation, but what it does speak to is that for a lot of people, a significant amount of people, they don't care if it affects them. They don't care what happens with redistricting as long as it is rightfully balancing out what Republicans are doing. And I would also bring attention relative to California, this was an extreme shift. Virginia before this had a congressional delegation of 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Now it's 10 and 1. that is a massive, massive shift of Virginia's representation in Congress, and it takes out some longtime congressional members. And I'd also bring attention to the fact that this was an effort led for a long time by Senator Louise Lucas in the state Senate of Virginia. And for her, there is very much a personal aspect, not just as a Black woman, but because before Virginia was gerrymandered in favor of Republicans in the 2000s, she was a very reasonable, very expected pick to be a member of Congress, and she never got to do that because of how aggressively Republicans gerrymandered Virginia. And she was very open about the fact that Republicans gave Black voters one district and told them to like it and to be happy with it and to be grateful. Now she gets to do that to Republicans, and they should be grateful the same way they asked that of her and her constituents. So part of it is very much retaliating not just against Republicans today, but what Republicans did many years ago, or not that many, truthfully, in Virginia. You're muted.
Excuse me. I think what you said earlier was a really excellent, succinct description. Is like there are attempts to balance out all of the decades of injustices that have been going on in the voting, in the electoral politics. Because a lot of people would say, oh, well, we talked about this last one. Well, is it fair? Okay, you have this predominant white rule, and the predominant right rule redistricted in a way, as you pointed out, to where you would have one concentrated vote for Black people to have in the state of Virginia. Be good with it. But now what you're doing, see, this is what they're doing. They're like, now, is it fair that now you're having all these Black people, these Latino people? Like, is that really fair? Is that really even? You know what I'm saying? I hear this type of talk all the time. So I think this is a really good way. Like, you cannot, there has to be an order. If you're on a scale, there has to be put, if the scale is like this, something needs to be put on this side to make it even. It just
Yeah.
does it by osmosis. That whatever is weighing it down, that it has a largesse, something's not just going to jump off and be like, I want to be equal. And it doesn't happen like that, right? You gotta manipulate anyway. So I think that's really important. But I also want to point this out. This actually just dropped yesterday, and this is because I do believe in citing the source that you have. So this is Delamar News Ledger reported this, and I want to say that it says that a closely decided vote to allow state makers to redraw Virginia's congressional districts is now tied up in court, Sebastian, leaving the future of the state's political map uncertain. Right? I just want to say this. I'm going to add this. Within 24 hours of the polls closing on April 21st, when it was decided that to approve and move forward with, yes, you can redraw the districts of Virginia before the 2030 census, a circuit court judge in Tazewell County blocked the results, putting the process on hold and sending the issues into the state's legal system. Now, both lawmakers and residents are waiting for a ruling from the state's highest court. This is from the Del Marva's News Ledger. I think this is really important. But this goes back to what we were saying in part one. This is a very litigious, people suing every left and right, like all this stuff, and how it is stuck in the courts. But just to give, like, there was something that somebody said, I'm just quoting the sage person, and they're saying, if it was not worth a damn, they would not be suing. And that's something we
Mhm.
need to be put into place. If Black votership, Latino votership, working class votership was not a problem in the U.S., they would not be sued in order to reduce it. All right. I just wanted to add that
Mhm.
part about Virginia, but I think this is really important. How do we, and I asked this before, but in a place like Virginia, how do we move around this? How are we navigating this?
Well, navigating in terms of what exactly?
How are we navigating? We have this vote. Now it's locked up in court. Term elections are around the way. What do people in the state of Virginia need to be doing now until either elections or now until the decision is made? What needs to
Mhm.
be going on? And you can
Yeah,
talk
well,
about it from every level, from the grassroots
mhm.
level, from the legislative level.
Yeah, those are the means I would say certainly should be assisting however they can with the legal fight to uphold the decision that Virginia voters came to in April. Generally, how it seems is that it's the kind of fight that is almost honorary in a sense, where it would be odd for Republicans not to fight it, but it would be just as odd if they actually won that fight. Because at the end of the day, most of the courts in Virginia are controlled by Democrats, and the Supreme Court in Virginia is as well. There's truthfully not much of a path there for Republicans to win, especially and most fundamentally because it was brought to the voters and it won. You can't take that fact away from the referendum. And even, Republicans might cynically say, oh, well, it's, Northern Virginia dictating what the rest of the state has to do. That is just objectively speaking, false. No statewide result in Virginia would be different for over half a decade if you removed Northern Virginia. When Republicans won in 2021, they would have still won. And when Democrats won every other time, they would have still won. The margin would have been different, the result would not. So I just wanted to clear that up in case there was any doubt or anyone who was readying a cynical and incorrect comment on the state of Virginia.
I think that's really important because let's emphasize that you cannot overturn the people's vote. You cannot overturn the people's vote. This is just a stalling tactic. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be clear on that, right? So I'm glad you definitely mentioned that. So now we're going to move to. Is it all right? We move to Florida.
Yes.
Now let's move to Florida. What is going? A whole bunch of shit is going on in Florida. Let's
I'm gonna
start
say
with
that again.
that.
Oh my God, that governor's race is crazy.
Whoa! I mean, it's been going on. All right, I got my undergrad. I went to Florida A&M for my undergrad, so I know about these Florida streets, and they are definitely a different vibe. But what is going on in terms of the redistricting wars in Florida?
Well, not even a week after the results came in from Virginia, Ron DeSantis came out with this map of the new districts in Florida. And, it was timed very intentionally. This was not a map that was concocted together as a response to Virginia. They had this ready from beforehand because they knew that in Virginia that yes was going to pass and the referendum was going to go through, and they know that that's not a legal battle they're going to win before November. And they released it then just to maintain the optics of that it's retaliation. Uh, and a key difference here with Virginia, as it has been with redistricting across the nation, is that Democrats are putting it up to a vote, Republicans are not. And part of that is just because they're afraid. They're afraid that they are the ones who are going to get trounced in the ballot box, and voters are not going to approve their maps because that's what the polling shows. And you can make any claim you want about who started what with redistricting. This instance of redistricting started with Republicans, and it started with Donald Trump asking for Texas to give him 5 seats in the House. That is a matter of fact that cannot be denied. This is verifiable information for the redistricting war in the second Trump administration. And a key part of the going back to the timing with how Florida put out that new map, a key part of that is that it was not long before the Supreme Court gave its opinion on the VRA, because a lot of the practices with that map would not have been allowed had Section 2 of the VRA not been weakened as was expected. I mean, one of the most egregious cases, and one that is personal to me, is how that new map in Florida splits up Orlando between four districts. Orlando has one of the highest Puerto Rican populations in any place in the US, and in Florida especially. So there, for voices that are already having a hard time being represented in Congress, like ours of Puerto Ricans, Ron DeSantis's map is attacking that even further, targeting specifically Darren Soto, who is one of the few members of the House who's Puerto Rican, obviously, besides the resident commissioner, our representative, who we vote on from Puerto Rico.
No, that's a really good point. A lot of people, if you don't know, Orlando became an important hub for those who had to leave the island after the hurricanes in 2017. That we called it we actually had that was actually our first major collaborative project at Arc Republic. Major collaborative project is where we like really kind of go in and focus on an issue, and it was what we call the hurricane trifecta. And several of
Mhm.
those hurricanes, I think there were like three major ones, but
Yeah,
two of the
Irma,
three,
Maria, and Harvey.
and Harvey. So Irma and Maria hit Puerto Rico. And
Hmm.
so people who had to leave the island, Orlando becomes like this really important hub. And if you know anything about migration, right, you often follow kind of like this route that has already been established. So since then, Orlando, Florida, but Orlando specifically, actually is, it could be very blue. It was right. It was very blue in votership. And so where I think a lot of Latino communities were more going red, Puerto Ricans tended to vote blue.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. In addition to, like I said, they're attacking. This is a very intentional attack by DeSantis. It's to break up that blue bloc, right?
Hmm.
That the very few blue Latino or Spanish speaking blue bloc you have in Florida, perhaps. I think that's really important. But I also want to say this: the connective tissue of how this racial gerrymandering that starts in order to weaken the black votership now become it trickles down into other communities, right? And this is what black folk are saying, like when we do these wins are for the benefit of all. But when we're targeted and we lose, there is a domino effect that is happening.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mhm.
Sorry.
This is no worries. Yeah, I would say also I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the states that are looking to redistrict and already maybe even already had gerrymandered maps are the states with the most black voters in the South and the states with the most Latinos being Texas, California, and Florida. Those three states account for around half of the Latinos in the US, and all three of them have already moved to redistrict. And even though California was obviously in favor of the Democratic Party, it's still redistricting doesn't simply they in favor of the Democratic Party doesn't strictly make it better for Latino representation in Congress because, like I talked about in part one, at the end of the day, regardless of which team you're redistricting for, you are inevitably, in almost all of these cases, diluting minority communities in favor of securing these seats for either party. In Texas and Florida, it's obviously and blatantly to silence Latinos further than they already were with their previous maps. And in California, obviously there's more room for Latino representation, but at the end of the day, by by getting rid of their independent commission, that does that does take that does catch minorities in the whole fight, and we end up losing in favor of this war at large.
But let's do this fun fact. Some of these Texas and California Latino voters can be very problematic. Okay?
Yeah.
We have work to do. That's basically what it's saying. We have a lot of work to do, and the work will be done, and we will be victorious. We must always keep that in the forefront. But there is a lot of work to do. All right, Sebastian, the last thoughts are on you about the redistricting wars, part two.
I would say in Florida, maybe this is just a little naive, but I want to say that there's a little more hope there than there is in other states because part of what makes it especially egregious, but does offer that glimmer of hope, is that in 2010, Florida did pass a constitutional amendment banning partisan gerrymandering. It is in the Florida Constitution and it was voted by Floridians. If that is the silver bullet here, and if that can be leveraged in Florida courts, which is a very difficult battle, that might be able to bring down that map, if not for the current midterms, then for 2028.
You know what will be good? I'm actually gonna pull. I have some really dope former peers of mine from college that are doing some really good work down in South Florida. You know what I think I need to do? I need to make a call and pull them in so we could have a really good, robust conversation about what that's looking like. In Florida because of the vested interest. But people, Florida is a very interesting state, right? I mean, it's first of
Certainly.
all, it's the land of the booty shake. You okay? No, but Florida is a very interesting state, and a whole bunch of reasons why. You go down to South Florida. South Florida is in physically the U.S., but culturally, politically, it is outside the U.S. And when you go to North Florida, it is like Southern Georgia. So it's a really, you have like these really kind of like extreme cultural, political identities, practices, and so on and so forth. But yeah, but it's still a very important state. Florida is for a whole
Hmm.
bunch of reasons. And I think what you're saying is that please don't give up on Florida. Where there is chaos, there can definitely be some important work that is going to be done that is very progressive. And I think overall, in my perspective, in these conversations, and we talked about this before, but this chaos, like this intentional chaos, this manufactured chaos that is going on, one of the things that we must do all is find a way that we can remain sane and rooted as all of these, hurricanes are blowing, right? Remain sane and
Hmm.
rooted and figure out ways that you can move incrementally, at the very least, in all of these storms that are brewing, and know that they are temporary. But on the other side of them, you must be ready. And in between them, stay grounded.
Hmm. Couldn't have
Right?
said it better myself.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we are ending this. Thank you so much. I don't know why I call you Sebastian. Like, I like the way I said Sebastian. It's so, but Sebastian, thank you so very much. I look forward to talking to you again. This is my Gen Z Connect. I will be, yes. This is the start is very needed because you are I believe the children are, well, you are not a child anymore, right? I believe the
Hmm.
young folk are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Why
Thank
did I
you.
just quote
Always
a
a
whole ass
privilege
song?
to be
Yes. All
here.
right. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Hmm.
We,